Yes, get more people over here.
Okay, so we're a little bit behind, but here you go, Marc Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're always beating the rain here. But thank you, we're live. This is Oh, I was going to say Libertopia. Good. Oh.
Pork West.
Pork West, but I know it's Jackalope Fest.
Liber West. Liber, Arizona.
Yes, it's Jackalope 2015, beautiful Baca's Meadow. It was sunnier before, but it's still beautiful here. Been glad to be here. I do a radio show for those who are not aware, which is most people here, called the No State Project. Not because we are trying to get to a stateless society. We already are in a stateless society because states do not exist. They're figments of the imagination. We're just trying to get the rest of the world to understand that and to realize that. And we're live every Saturday from 4 to 7 Eastern Standard Time. So the show was recorded, but I urge you, definitely check out the podcast. And thanks to Calvin, who, yes, Calvin was supposed to be here. We've got Dan and, of course, non-entity behind the camera, who we appreciate that. Hopefully Calvin will be here for next year, but check out the podcast because we got some really good information on there, which I cannot cover here today. But the goal of the show is really an extension of the work that we do during the week. And so Dan, we'll talk later on, get some video for the show about basically helping people who are under attack by people called government. And when I use the word government, it's not because I believe that there's actually a government. I mean, I could say that, so-and-so, non-entity played Santa Claus this year. That doesn't mean, you believe in Santa Claus, you contradicting shill bastard, you. No, it's part of speech. It's just like an atheist can say, oh my God. It doesn't mean that they believe in gods. It's kind of silly. So what I've been doing is using the Socratic method and applying it to politics. And the Socratic method, in my own lay terms, is really a way of questioning somebody on their argument. And the difference between what a lot of people do when they go to court is I don't believe in allowing for any sacred cows. And the Socratic method is an effective tool to bring out that somebody's argument is fallacious, that it's ridiculous, it holds no water. Right, Bob? And I've noticed a long time ago, after being in court all those times, one of the least effective things you can do, especially when you're in court or you're just having a discussion, or let's say an argument in the intellectual sense. A bad thing to do is to take a position. Now, it might be something we're having intellectual, discussion and argument. We can take, different viewpoints and different arguments. But when you're in court, when someone's attacking you, it's really, really bad to take a position. Because even if your position is correct, you're taking the burden on yourself. Because the proponent of an argument carries the burden of proof, right? We all agree to that? Come on, guys, you got to make it sound a little better for the video. People are going to think it's as empty as the field over here, because it really isn't. So that's always a bad thing, because when you take a burden of proof upon yourself when you're in court, well, anyone who's ever been to court knows, especially if you're in traffic or taxes, does the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury do they give a damn about what you have to say and what your opinion of the law is? No. Of course not. So even if it's correct, they don't care. So the idea that you want to go into court and you want to convince, or you're doing work as a journalist activist and you're trying to convince an audience of something, trying to convince the mainstream that there is no such thing as a government, it's not going to work out for you, because you're going to look like you're crazy. I should know I get called every name in the book. But if you're using the Socratic method and you are just taking somebody's argument, someone like Scott Bales, who the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Harvard law grad, economics and law. Yes, I'm tooting my own horn by building him up. Because by using the Socratic method, it doesn't matter if Scott Bales graduated honors at Harvard Law. Because if you don't have the evidence to support your argument, you don't have the evidence. But just telling him he doesn't have any evidence doesn't do anything. It's not going to convince an audience. Nobody's going to care. But if you just ask questions, then the person who's listening, the audience, can figure that out. It's especially important in court because when you've got your prosecutor or your judge stuttering and stammering, that's always going to make you look good. Like, whoa. Anybody ever speak to someone on the phone or in court and you ask a question, do you have evidence to prove X, Y, Z, and you get a 15-second pause? Yeah. Now, does a 15-second pause, does that scream credibility? No. No. I actually had that the other day. I was speaking with a tax agent in Minnesota. Swears that just because Kevin is physically in Minnesota that the constitutional laws apply to him. Swears it's absolutely true. Do you have any actual physical corroborating evidence? Do you have any proof that that argument is true? 15 seconds of silence. She doesn't answer the question, but she still insists. But the beauty is, anybody with half a brain in their head is not going to be fooled by her lack of a response. They're going to hear the 15-second pause, and they're going to think, wow, this is bad. And just a quick follow-up, her supervisor asked the same question. She agrees, if you're physically in Minnesota, our laws apply to you, we have jurisdiction, you have to pay us. Oh, do you have it? And she's a mid-level supervisor because Tammy Suchet's supervisor wouldn't call me back, so I had to go above him. So when I asked her the question, I got another long pause. But she didn't try to back out and try to make excuses. She actually agreed. Well, she didn't agree. She said, I don't have enough information to answer that question. Now, for someone hearing that, they figure, okay, Tammy, she's just a low-level grunt. I get it. She's not experienced enough. But the supervisor is a mid-level supervisor at the Department of Revenue. There's only 2 people above her before you get to the governor. So that carries some credibility. So just by my asking the question. So I just want to cover briefly the Socratic method and how we go about doing this and why it's so effective. Obviously, we know it's named after Socrates. And it is a time-tested, it's a proven, effective method for getting to whether someone's argument is valid. Basically, what you're saying is, how do you know that? How do you know that? So one example of the Socratic method that you want to keep in mind is you're just asking 6 kind of questions. So to quote Kipling, I keep 6 honest men with me at all times. They've taught me everything I know. Their names are who, what, where, when, why, and how. And for those who correctly use the trivium, we know that the logic part is the why, the rhetoric part is the how. But the who, what, where, and when is your fact gathering. You got to get some data. You got to get some evidence to go based on then. And you'll notice when you're talking with these prosecutors, you're talking with the status or someone insisting their argument is true, 2 of the most effective questions you can ask them, instead of saying that you're full of crap, is just ask them, why is that true? So a quick one that I have on the website, markstevens.net, was with an IRS agent. And he insisted that the Constitution and laws applied, and that's why the IRS had jurisdiction over him. Insisted that that was true. Now, if I had come out and just said, you're wrong, I don't agree, well, then we're just 2 idiots who don't agree. So take him at his word and engage the questions. It's not confrontational. It's not argumentative, because is asking questions an argument? No. But they'll say that as an excuse not to answer the question. Well, that's a frivolous argument. It's a question. Okay, so with this IRS agent, I asked him, do you have any actual evidence to prove that just because he's physically in California, the Constitution and laws apply to him? And he said, yes. And okay, I don't normally get a yes to that question. So, my logical follow-up question is going to be, what specific facts and evidence do you rely on to prove the Constitution applies to him? And he said, well, we have the wage reported income. Well, that usually shuts people down. Well, I had income, and it was reported. I had a W-4 or a W-2, whatever the 1099, whatever. So, as part of the Socratic method, and knowing how sleazy these people tend to be, because when you catch them not being able to support their argument, when you nail them in a situation like this where they cannot support their argument, and any one of us would feel really stupid and humiliated at that point, so we want to bail. And so we want to say things like, you're taking me out of context. That's not what I said. So a part of the Socratic method is making sure you understand the person's position. So I ask him, remember, you always want to ask your verifying questions as you go. Let me see if I understand you correctly here. You're saying that the wage reported income proves the Constitution applies to him. That's right. So now, knowing the Socratic method, it's very easy to bring it home and ask the home run question that undoes his entire argument. And what question you think you should ask when they say something like that, that the wage reported income proves the Constitution applies? How? So when you listen to the recording, that's exactly what I asked him. Could you please explain to me exactly how the wage reported income proves that? And for those who have not heard the IRS agent's final answer, it was 3 words that we love to hear so often, but we just don't get it. He said, I don't know. So, did you speak a little too soon, sir, when you said you had evidence proving the Constitution applied? Yeah. Okay, so you don't really have evidence the Constitution applies, so you don't have any evidence of jurisdiction at all. So whether there's wage reported income is completely irrelevant. And we did get a stay of proceedings on that. So, and the most recent one, we do have a 45-day letter which says, based on the information you provided, we need more time. That's usually a precursor to having it all thrown out, which if you go to markstevens.net and look up where we had 6 years thrown out for a good friend on the East Coast, and you had the 45-day letter. All the letters that we sent and that the IRS sent are there, and you can see. And that all we did was employ the Socratic method. I never took a position other than I've asked you the questions, I've asked you for the evidence, and you got nothing. If you disagree with me, I'm more than happy to listen to what your evidence is. So we get the 45-day letter, and they realize, thank goodness. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to throw it out. I'm not saying that. What I'm just trying to demonstrate is why it's so effective to use the Socratic method. If they go ahead and say you just raised a frivolous argument, we can come back and now show bad faith because you didn't raise an argument. Even if you want to say that your argument, that we don't have evidence to support our argument. Well, Mark, you argue that the IRS lacks evidence to support their argument. That's frivolous. Well, no. Because to be frivolous means to be not just wrong, it has to be so wrong that it requires no demonstration. So that's another reason why the rationale behind why I always suggest and urge us to stick with issues of fact. Because issues of fact, you could be wrong but not frivolous. Because if to show that someone's wrong on an issue of fact, don't you have to demonstrate the facts? The demonstration shows it's not frivolous. Of course, when you're talking about the IRS, all their frivolous arguments are based on issues of opinion, issues of law. Not one of them are issues of fact. So that's why you can always go through and say, well, here's your manual. So here's your manual. Can you point out in this 100-page manual or 80-page manual, can you point out where my issue of fact has been deemed to be a frivolous argument? How many times do you think they've actually cited where that was done? 0. So it's this George Costanza. I got nothing. I got nothing. And you'll see that regardless of the fact that we're not all Harvard Law grads, you don't need to be a Harvard Law grad in order to effectively run someone through the Socratic method and Socratic questioning. And even if the person you're talking to, like I've mentioned, Scott Bales, Supreme Court Chief Justice, doesn't matter. I've done this. I spoke the other day, and I mentioned this on the show. I walked Walter Maroney through the Socratic method. And Walter Maroney is an attorney with the New Hampshire Employment Security Department. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details. Thank you. Well, we're covered here, so I've never actually heard this before. And so after going through and questioning, why is this true? Why is this true? What evidence do you base this on? How does this work? Or what's the connection here? You're begging the question, and why is this true? He actually admitted that his argument, to follow me, I know this is going to sound really stupid. I'm just quoting. It's not me. His argument or his position that the laws, the Constitution and laws of New Hampshire applied to Bill because he was physically in New Hampshire was a notion. That's the word the man used with me. A notion. A notion. You're going to file in court on a notion. You're going to potentially ruin someone's life on a notion. They do it all the time, and he also said that he didn't have to present evidence. He even said it was not something that required an offer of proof. And he's right. Why? Because in their courts, in their system, they aren't required to produce any evidence at all. They think, and this is where the Socratic method, just asking questions, is so important. I spoke to someone in England, and they gave me the same kind of thing. You'll hear this all the time when you question them, but you gotta stick to the Socratic method. Don't take a position, just restate theirs and ask a question based on it. I asked someone in England the same thing. He said, look, that's right, Mark. If you're physically in London, these regulations apply to you. Okay, that's your argument. I understand. Why is that true? Well, because you were physically in London, the laws apply. He seemed to be one of these true believers. And I said, do you understand, sir? You're just repeating your argument. You're not answering. I'm asking you, do you have any, at least I didn't pull the camera down. Do you have any actual evidence to support that argument? I know you think that. But at this point, it looks like a non sequitur. It just doesn't follow. Why is this true? Just tell me and we'll cut you a check. Sir, I don't even understand that at this point what you're asking me. So maybe we could get some agreement here. You agree you can't possibly prove that these laws apply just because they're physically in London, right? I'll have to get my supervisor. And the supervisor said she agrees with me that the laws do apply because they're physically in London. We know that's her argument. We know. But that is the beauty of the Socratic method in action. And Dan, you've seen that. You've used it, you've seen it, you've participated as a media rep, and you've helped people in court with some damage control. And that's, to me, it is by far the most effective method. Because if you're tangling with a seasoned litigator, someone who knows how to spin, if you try to engage him in an argument, you will lose. You will lose. These are professional con men, and they know how to talk. Hey, this Pearden, we'll talk about him in a moment, he tried to put one over on Mike. If you wanted that, you had to do a subpoena. Excuse me, this is a civil traffic. Why are you asking me to have a subpoena when there's no pretrial discovery? See? Question. Right? Question. Why are you telling me I need a subpoena when there's no pretrial discovery? Leave the burden on the proponent of the argument, because almost 100% of political arguments are completely false. There is no state, there is no government, and anyone who says that they do believe that there's a government has to prove that there's a state. And to prove that there's a state, you have to prove there's a body politic and citizens. And this is something that I'll have another video on. And to prove that there are citizens, you have to show that there is evidence of reciprocal obligations of protection and allegiance. And is there any evidence of that? No. Why? Because they're just a group of men and women forcing us to pay them. That's it. And if you ignore that evidence like some people in the media do, then you got nothing but delusions. And we got enough of those. But to break those delusions, stick to the Socratic method. So again, we're only asking questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. We're asking confirming questions. Is this your position? And then asking them another question based on that. You're always hammering away at their argument with just questions. And if you do that, it's going to be a lot more effective. It doesn't mean that the ticket's going to get thrown out. It doesn't mean that you're going to convince them. But the important thing is you're going to convince the people who are listening, and that's the audience anyway. So I appreciate everyone coming out and listening. My name is Marc Stevens. You get more at markstevens.net. The radio show, The No State Project, live every Saturday from 4 to 7 Eastern Standard Time on LRN.FM, Liberty Radio Network. And if anyone thinks that there is a state and citizens, more than happy to have you on the show. We all did that, but there had to be a republic for which it stands, and there is no republic because there are no citizens, because we can prove that there are no duties of allegiance and protection, because they're forcing us to pay them. They were never created. There is no body politic. If there's no body politic, there is no state. If there is no state, there's no government. They're just men and women forcing us to pay them. So we begin and end the investigation on the same set of facts, and it's the only set of facts that are important to us. So, again, thank you very much.